time for the Property Podcast, where every week tens of thousands of property investors, new and experienced, join together to get news, knowledge and laughs at our expense. With me, Rob Bence.
And me, Rob Dix. Join us every Thursday morning for your weekly dose of property ideas and motivation. Then head over to our website at thepropertypodcast.com to keep the conversation going. Now though, let's get started.
Welcome to the Property Podcast. It is episode 34. This week's episode is thepropertyhub.net/fire. As always, nothing's changed. I'm Rob Bence, and nothing else has changed. He's still Rob Dix, but Rob, how are you today?
I'm all right, Rob. I feel a bit, we had someone on the show this week who was far more successful than us. So that's always an interesting one. His podcast absolutely dwarfs ours, but that's okay. He's a lovely, lovely man, so I don't mind being reminded of that.
He certainly is on fire.
So we're talking about John Lee Dumas from Entrepreneur on Fire. He is our guest this week. We've spoken to him before. We've both been interviewed on his podcast. It's really great to catch up with him and share his journey with you, and what he has achieved in a ridiculously short space of time is just unbelievable. So that's all coming up, and there's loads of great stuff to take away from that interview.
There certainly is. But before we get going, here's a quick reminder. This is the second to last in the series. We've got one more interview next week, which we'll talk about towards the end of the show. But our first episode back on property is going to be a listener's question special. So we want to get right back into the things you want to talk about. So make sure you leave us a voicemail. Go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast. Follow the link on the side, which says leave a voicemail. Really simple. Just click there and record for your computer and ask us a question. Anything about property. We're happy to answer it. We want to do an episode on all the things that are important to you, that you want to understand, that you want us to cover. So it's going to be a really good episode for us to get the ball rolling back again with property. But we're not certainly rushing to that point, because we've got two brilliant interviews lined up. And the first one being today with John Lee Dumas. So, John Dumas, Entrepreneur on Fire, a juggernaut of a podcast, one of the biggest podcasts in America, certainly in the top 3 business podcasts in America without doubt. He produces a podcast every single day of the week. How does he do it? Well, should we find out, Rob?
Let's do it. And also, let's find out, if you listen carefully, he reveals in the middle how the Property Podcast played a small role in getting some exposure on iTunes. So check that one out.
Small role? We made him. Just joking, John. Roll the interview. John, thank you so much for joining us. It's brilliant to have you on the Property Podcast.
Rob, I am so excited to be here.
We're excited to have you, John. John, we've got a lot to ask you, so I'm going to jump straight in if that's okay with you. And we're going to talk a lot about business, but this is the Property Podcast, and it's not completely foreign to you. You've worked in real estate before you started your podcast journey and your business journey. You worked in real estate after serving in the army and going to law school. So how did you find it? Some people love it. Some people hate it. How was real estate for you?
Real estate was a great experience. It was really one of my first tastes, my first introductions to the entrepreneurial world, because I really, I was 100% commission. I was knocking on my own doors. It was me waking up in the morning, deciding what my plan of action was going to be. It was a very unstructured lifestyle. I wasn't going into an office. I didn't have a boss that was hovering over me, telling me what to do day to day. And I really thrived in that environment. And I spent 2 years in the residential world and then 2 years in the commercial world, enjoyed both for different reasons. But again, it really led me down the path of embracing what it meant to be an entrepreneur, and eventually was the reason why I dove into my current venture, which is Entrepreneur on Fire.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because as a realtor, there's a lot of driving. It's like that in the UK. It's even more the case in the US. And that was what led to what you would call your aha moment, which gave you the whole idea for Entrepreneur on Fire. So talk to us about that moment, and then tell us what the first few months of getting your business started from scratch were like for you.
100%. So as a commercial broker and as a residential real estate broker as well, I was driving all the time to appointments, to showings, to the office, to clients' houses. You name it. I was always in the car, and I quickly fell out of love. Not that I was ever in love with the radio, but I quickly fell out of love with any kind of liking I had towards it, with just the same songs being played, long commercials. So I started to gravitate towards talk radio. And then luckily I found out about the world of podcasting. And that to me was love at first listen. I could press play and press pause whenever I wanted to. It was on demand and it was free. So for years, guys, I was a massive consumer of podcasts and a lot of real estate podcasts. Actually, I really enjoyed the real estate podcasts, especially when I was a real estate agent, because I was driving around and I was able to improve myself and get great ideas for my business. But then one day, completely stuck in traffic again, not really enjoying the fact that I was stuck in traffic, but at least I had my podcast. But then something terrible happened. I ran out of podcasts. Like the podcast that I enjoyed listening to, I was completely out of. And I knew very intimately the publishing schedule of these podcast hosts and that none of them were coming out with another podcast for a week, 2 weeks, potentially even a month. I had gone through all of their back catalogs over the preceding months. And I was like, why is there not a 7-day-a-week podcast that I want to listen to that interviews inspiring and successful entrepreneurs and shares their journey? I want to listen to that. There must be other people too. So I went back home. I looked for it. It didn't exist, guys. So I was like, you know what? There's a void. There's a niche. I know there's at least a couple of people out there like me that would love to wake up to a fresh episode, that would love to know that when they went to the gym in the evening, that there was a new episode waiting for them. So that was my aha moment. That was when the light bulb went off. I decided to create Entrepreneur on Fire, which is the only 7-day-a-week business podcast that interviews inspiring and successful entrepreneurs and shares their journey. So that was truly the aha moment. And I'd love to talk about the months that followed that aha moment. It started with a mentor. It started with a mastermind. It started with a conference, and it just led to where we're at now, which is over 500 episodes. We just won the award in iTunes for Best of iTunes 2013, which was such an honor. And, we are just really enjoying the business that we're building around this podcast.
John, the success you've had is phenomenal. We're going to talk about some of the things that you've done and even the transparency that you give on everything you do. But the success, it's short term because is it still less than 2 years that the podcast has been going? And I mean, when you started, did you think it was going to be as successful as it's been? And even if that hasn't been the case, what do you think are the key ingredients that has made it happen? What's happened along your journey that you feel they were key steps, they were key ingredients that allowed the success to take place?
No, great points. It's been a very fast rise to where I'm at now. The podcast itself is less than 17 months old from when I launched, which is just so crazy to me. And to kind of, go back to that foundation that I kind of brushed over, the first thing that I did, guys, was I got a mentor, and that mentor said, John, you need to go to a conference. You need to actually see if these are your people, if this is an industry that you want to actually be in. And I had never been to a conference like this before. And so when I got there and I was like, wow, these really are my people. I am so enjoying engaging with the attendees, sitting in these presentations, listening to the speakers, and then asking them questions and shaking their hands at the after parties. I knew that I was in the right industry. It just clicked with me. So then I went back to my little studio in Maine, which is about an hour and a half north of Boston. And I just worked all summer learning how to podcast, getting 40 interviews lined up. So when I launched in September of 2012, 17 months ago, I would be able to honor that 7-day-a-week commitment. And that's truly what I'd done. So when I launched back in September of 2012, it was with zero online presence. It was with zero broadcasting experience. And believe me, those first 50 episodes prove that zero broadcasting experience. That has only come with my 500 plus interviews that I've now done over the last year and a half. And it wasn't an immediate rocket ship upwards. It was a very slow, steady start where I interviewed some great people, started getting some good traction in New and Noteworthy, which both you, Robs, and myself have experienced. I was honored to be featured on the homepage of iTunes, which I know you guys have as well. And, you actually were the people that inspired me to really pursue getting featured on the homepage of iTunes. And that was another major leap forward for me as a podcaster, that recognition, that credibility, really continuing to build my authority. And then at about the 6-month mark is really where I hit my tipping point. I had just been asked to speak at a major conference on podcasting, which blew me away because of how, again, quickly that happens. I had some amazing guests, Tim Ferriss, Gary Vaynerchuk, Seth Godin, that really, again, built my credibility up. And I just continued every single day, 7 days a week to release a new podcast. And it was growing exponentially as an audience. Why? Because every single morning, my first email went out to that guest saying, Rob, your interview just went live on Entrepreneur on Fire. You shared an amazing journey. I would be honored if you would share that journey with your audience. And every single day, 7 days a week, that guest would, growing my audience exponentially, rolling down that hill with that snowball effect, just getting faster and faster and bigger and bigger. And, again, we can go to the income side of it because I know you guys mentioned transparency, and I'm a huge believer in being transparent. But again, the first 6 months, it was just a lot of red. It was a lot of investing in myself. It was a lot of not making any money. And it was a lot of, sleepless nights, like really thinking and trying to figure out if I was doing the right thing. But I just continued to follow my intuition. I continued to follow my gut. And then at that 6-month point, when that tipping point did happen, that's when things really started to get fun.
It's been incredible to follow along. Like, I've been listening since something like your third week. My wife introduced me to the show and just sort of been listening since then and to watch your trajectory. It's just insane how quickly, to me, it seems to have happened. But did it feel quick to you? Because I know that as an entrepreneur, you always want things to be going faster. It always feels like nothing's happening and you want things to be going 10 times faster than it is. How have you experienced? Does it seem like it's been a crazy ride, or are you still wanting more?
It's been a little bit of both. I mean, honestly, there were times in those first 6 months when I was really questioning if I was creating a viable business. And by viable business, I mean, am I creating something right now that is going to generate consistent income for me? Because I did have a runway. I had a savings and I knew that I could rely on that for a certain amount of time, but not for a significant amount of time. So I knew at some point I was going to have to flip that switch and really start generating some income. And, for the first 6 months, there was just a lot of questions there. Nobody had really built a viable business just around a podcast. People were doing it very successfully, with podcasting being a part of their business, but not the main driver of their business. So I was kind of breaking new ground with not only the 7-day-a-week format, but with the sole focus just being on creating quality podcasts every single day that was taking up, most of my time. So again, when that 6-month point hit and I really started generating big numbers, over 100,000 unique downloads every single month in over 145 countries around the world, sponsors started taking notice. And I was actually reached out to by some sponsors who said, John, we would love to get in front of your audience. We'd love to sponsor Entrepreneur on Fire. And that 6-month point, that April of 2013, was actually my first 5-figure month. And I say this my first 5-figure month because I generated over 5 figures in income, but it was actually the first month I made any money that I wasn't even in the red. It wasn't like I made a couple thousand like the month before. It was like with my expenses and with my investing in myself and conferences and coaches and masterminds, like the first 6 months, I was actually going backwards, which I was fine with. I knew how business worked and I knew I was willing to invest in myself to build that foundation. But it was great to see going from month 5 in the red to month 6, actually being in the green by 5 figures was a huge jump. So that was a big switch for me. That's when I really realized that what I was doing was something that could really be a viable business. And actually at the 1-year anniversary, which was September of 2013, we decided to start publishing income reports. I was inspired by Pat Flynn, who's been doing this since 2008 for the passive income community. I wanted to do it for podcasters. I wanted to show other podcasters out there what we were being successful at so they could emulate those successes. I also wanted to show them what we were failing at so they could avoid those failures and those mistakes. So starting in September, we started publishing our monthly income reports. That first month was right around $45,000. And then since then, that number has really just been growing pretty impressively to where in January, we actually grossed $158,000. We netted $138,000. And I can tell you, February, even for being a short month, is already a bigger month than January.
Wow.
Wow.
It is just explosive to look at it. But I was going to ask you about the income reports, because you've always been very transparent. You've always talked about the numbers you've been generating. You've always talked about what the process has been like for you, and you've shared what your journey has been like in the same way that you've got other people to talk about their journeys. But the income reports, that's a whole other level. And in the UK, people don't like talking about how much money they make, and it's all very taboo. And you're just getting it out there and saying, look, here is line by line everything that I've generated income from, everything that I've spent money on. And it is incredibly instructive and useful. But what's it been like for you? Has having that level of transparency brought you any unexpected challenges or opportunities after sort of being about 5 months into doing that now?
Well, my accountant says that I'm crazy because I'm going to have the IRS all over me. But I just tell him the same thing that I tell everybody. Like, I really, have nothing to hide. I am really just passionate about inspiring other entrepreneurs through my podcast to take their leap in whatever that area may be. And since I've had such success with Entrepreneur on Fire, the podcast, I'm also inspired to share with other podcasters the successes that I'm having. So again, they can really take the shortcuts that I was able to take as well. And by shortcuts, I just mean like not wasting time on things that don't work, that I was able to take advantage of as well by investing in myself early, getting a mentor who had been there and done that for years. And she was able to say, all right, John, you don't have to waste time with this, and this. Like, if you focus on this, that'll be so important. And I realized how much time, energy, and effort that was saving me. And if I can bring that to the general community, I would really be honored to be able to do so. And so, like you said, we do line out all of the ways that we're generating income, but we also line out all of our expenses too, because we are running a business. And in January alone, our expenses exceeded $20,000. I mean, obviously the profit margin was phenomenal on $158,000 to only have $20,000 worth of expenses, but that's still a massive number. That $20,000 in expenses is a massive number that, would scare a lot of people. But when we break it down line by line and show that, we spent, thousands of dollars on Facebook advertising to our weekly podcast workshop for our product, Podcasters Paradise, and the fact that I'm spending money every month on a mentor, that I'm spending, a lot of money for the amount of visits my site gets and the amount of emails that it generates. Like, there's a lot of expenses to come along with running a big business. And so I know that people can take those expense reports and kind of extrapolate out and say, okay, well, John's doing that because he's getting over 500,000 downloads a month and he has over 10,000 emails, XYZ. And so they could really kind of proportion it down to where they are right now and say, so this is not that scary that, if I was in this situation right here, I would only be spending X, Y, and Z because I just don't have that big of an audience yet. So it kind of makes things less scary. It makes those numbers seem less daunting when you break them down line by line, and just be open and just be transparent. And then again, inspire people to just take action.
The thing that strikes me, and anybody who will listen to everything you do, is how much you do. It's not enough that you got a daily podcast, but then you also find time to do other things, including sleep. So, like Podcasters Paradise, if the podcast wasn't enough, then you found time to do that as well. So you have to be extremely efficient with your time. Now, I know, because obviously listen to the things you do, one of the things you've talked about before is batching your entire week's recording schedule into a single day, and then you blast through them in one go. So what got you started doing that? How's batching helped you become more productive? And is there any other things you've implemented that have helped you become more efficient with your time?
So I really do point back to my time in the military as an officer in the U.S. Army for 8 years. I was 4 years active, 4 years in the reserves. We were really taught the power of discipline. And, first when you mentioned that word batching, of really batching everything that we were doing, training, activities, etc. But really, I was really shown the truth of Parkinson's law. And if you Google Parkinson's law, you'll see the definition of it is that tasks will expand to the time that you allot them. And so I really understood this, and it was driven home to me at a very young age that was very true. So when I was setting up Entrepreneur on Fire's schedule back before I ever launched, and I was talking with my mentor and I was talking with other people that were very, knowledgeable in the podcasting world, they were saying, John, Nobody's done a 7-day-a-week podcast because it can't be done. You can't schedule that many. All you're going to be doing is scheduling, and then all you're going to be doing is interviewing. You're not going to have time to actually do anything that's going to generate an income for your business. Like, that's why it's not done. Just do one a week. You'll be able to, sleep at night, and you'll be able to just like function like a normal human being and grow your business that way. And I knew that I just did not want to be in that red ocean. I wanted to go into the blue ocean where nobody was, where it was wide open, and where there was a niche and a void that needed to be filled. And I knew from my Army training that if I could just set up a schedule, and that schedule ended up being starting at 8 a.m. every single Monday and interviewing one entrepreneur every hour on the hour for 8 hours, that by the end of that day, guess what? I would have completed 8 interviews, and my weekly interviews would be done plus one. So since that day that I set that schedule up, starting on Mondays, I've been interviewing 8 entrepreneurs every single Monday. And every single Monday night, I'm exhausted. It's been a very long day, and I'm not trying to make light of it because it is a lot of work. But guess what? I'm done all of my interviews for the week in one day. So it's a very powerful way to go about things, and people can really apply that to almost any aspect of their entrepreneurial journey.
It's the definition of discipline. That is on the hour, every hour for 8 hours. It's just phenomenal. But I love how you spotted an opportunity, and even though people were telling you it couldn't be done, you just went for it, and you proved that it can be done, but you have to be insane enough to sit and do that every Monday. But John, we can't keep you forever because you do enough talking every week as it is. But tell us before we let you go, what plans you've got for the future? Because this is still a new business. This is still a business model that you've established. It's very new. What's coming up next? Do you have more plans for the Entrepreneur on Fire brand? Are you going to start a new podcast to fill up your Tuesdays? What's going to happen?
So my future, I am pretty excited about, to be honest with you. The Entrepreneur on Fire flow is really working, with the Mondays really just being filled up by these great interviews with great, inspiring, successful entrepreneurs. And I just do not see that stopping. And as far as other areas, one thing that I'm really excited about in 2014 that we've been doing is a weekly free and live webinar, which we're calling the Podcast Workshop, where we just invite anybody that wants to join us, and it's free, and it's all over YouTube streaming live. So it's unlimited amount of people can join us, and there's a chat box and they can chat away. And then for basically an hour and a half, I just get on the mic and I have this whole presentation, which I'm always updating, always improving, always changing, where I'm just sharing the benefits of podcasting, my journey, how, the success that I've had, how I've had my success, what's in store for podcasting in 2014 and beyond. For the last 45 minutes of the actual webinar, we actually get into Podcasters Paradise, which is my community for anybody that wants to learn how to create, grow, and monetize their podcast and add that part of the business to their business. So we really dive into that. I actually take people inside of Podcasters Paradise during the webinar to show them the over 120 video tutorials. They, again, take you from step 1 to step done to show you how to grow your audience, to show you how to monetize your podcast. And the success stories, Rob, that are coming out of there are just inspiring.
From step 1 to step done. I love that. I'd say I'd steal it for myself, but everyone now knows where I would have got it from. So, well, that's brilliant. Step 1 to step done. Okay. Well, John, finally, one last question for you. You've got some network now because of the podcasting and what you do. And as you said, you're mixing all the time with inspiring entrepreneurs, which is incredible. Is there a piece of advice that's really stuck out and stuck with you and that you still really hold and stick true to today? And if so, if there is that one piece of advice that you think, yeah, that's brilliant, who said it?
So it's really a theme that's come up in my 500 and now 50 plus episodes that I've recorded with today's most inspiring and successful entrepreneurs. And it's a theme that I've really been able to pull out because it's so simple. And I actually want to really kind of highlight 2 books that really talk so eloquently about this one theme. And that is just start. Like literally those 2 words are the most powerful things. And we're not saying like just, throw everything else away and like quit your job and just dive in whole hog. We're saying, hey, wake up 30 minutes earlier in the morning, go to bed 15 minutes later at night, and use that time every single day to learn some skill that you're passionate about, to become an expert in that over the course of 6, 8, 12 months. You will be amazed at how far you've come by just starting and being consistent about it. And that word consistent is so key. And those two books that I want to bring up that really drive this point home in such a powerful way are The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson and The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. Both of those books speak so truthfully about how just the small things that we do right every single day add up to massive success over time. And one of the big quotes in there is, what's easy to do is also easy not to do. And the major problem with most entrepreneurs and small business owners is that because it's easy not to do, they don't do it, even though it's easy to do. So those people like myself who actually are doing those things every single day that is easy to do are the ones that are having all of the success.
It's really good to hear you say that. And we'll link to both of those books in the show notes. But it's like we don't normally do interviews on our show. We're only doing 5 in a row. And just doing it, just starting is the theme that's come up from everyone. And we talk about that all the time. So it's nice that we've now got guests on the show who can echo it. And so people know that it's not just some kind of weird bee that we've got in our bonnet. It is everyone saying that you just have to get out there, make a little bit of progress every day, and you'll be streets ahead of where you were even a year ago. And I think you're kind of the poster child for this, because like, look at where you were under 2 years ago and what you've achieved in that time just by grinding it out every day.
2 years ago, I was driving to an appointment to sell a commercial real estate building. And you know what? Nothing is wrong with that industry and nothing is wrong with that career. And I know that 20 years ago, like I would have made a full career out of being a commercial real estate broker because I really enjoyed it. It's an amazing way to make an incredible living and support your family. But when it really came down to it for me, John Lee Dumas, it didn't like burst me into flames. Like I didn't just like light my passions and my fires. And again, it would have been definitely a great career path for me because it fit a lot of the needs and desires that I really rebelled against in corporate America and that I rebelled against in law school. But it didn't quite just that key. It fit into lock, guys, but it didn't quite turn for me. And, like it turns for you in real estate. That key turned for me with Entrepreneur on Fire. And so, that is really where I found my fit. And I'm able to do those small things every single day that are easy to do because I get up excited to do them.
And it's some key that's unlocked some door. I tell you. I've loved following your progress because it's so rapid. So there's always something to see and follow what you're doing. And if anybody else wants to follow and see what you're doing, where's the best place for them to find you?
Sure. All the magic, Rob and Rob, happens at eofire.com. That's eofire.com. And of course, if anybody thinks podcasting is something that they love to do, they're hearing how much fun myself, Rob, and Rob are having right now, and they think in their industry and their niche they can make an impact. Just go to podcastersparadise.com, sign up for our free live weekly webinar, and we will tell you a lot of great things.
John, it's been such a pleasure to catch up with you again. Thank you so much for coming on our show. I'm sure everyone really, really enjoyed it. It's been great to speak to you. We'll hopefully catch up again soon.
Sounds like a plan. Rob and Rob, ignite.
Thanks, John. Really appreciate it. Rob, what a lovely, lovely guy.
Ridiculously nice, ridiculously successful. And I thought we'd done quite a lot in the last year, but what he's accomplished in 18 months or something is just ridiculous. It really just shows you what's possible.
We're slacking. We need to step it up.
Yeah. So much jumped out at me from that interview. Well, what did you take away from it?
One of the first things that sort of sprung to mind was networking. John, he's not just sat at home and tried to figure out everything himself. He's built a network. He's made sure he's got himself out there. He's met other people who are a little bit further on than where he wants to be. And he's built relationships. Look how far that's got him. It's really obviously worked for him. And that's something we've talked about in so many of our podcasts before. And that's why we do the meetups. Our next meetup is next month. And you absolutely should get along to these things because you'll meet people of all different levels, people who are similar levels to yourself, but also a bit further on. And John has benefited so much from networking. But the other thing he seems to have benefited from, Rob, is mentorships.
I was really surprised when he's mentioned that he's still got mentors now. And like, he's really, really successful now. He's got one of the biggest podcasts out there, and he's building a really successful business off the back of it. But he still has mentors. He still knows that he's got things to learn, and there are people with more experience than him who he can learn from. And he also had a mentor right back at the start. So he came out of the blocks really strongly with his podcast because he didn't just start it on a whim. He spent a few months building it up, finding out exactly what he needed to do, and getting himself in a position where he was the most likely to succeed. So he said that he spent the first 6 months like not really knowing if it was going to work. And I think that's the case with all businesses. It's the same with anything. But he had given himself the best possible chance of success by working with people early, taking it seriously, and just really setting himself up by benefiting from other people's experience.
Definitely. And I think linking to that as well is he's taking great advantage of masterminds. He's sat in groups with other like-minded individuals, people who are trying to better themselves as well, maybe successful people. And he meets regularly in mastermind groups talking about his progress and where he's trying to get to, puts out there what he's hoping to achieve, and the rest of the group give feedback. And that's something we've started in the Property Hub Plus that is only just getting going, but we're super excited about because we know how powerful they are. We've both been involved in masterminds ourselves in the past, and I'm currently in one. And it's so, so rewarding. So whether you're in property or business, you can really take advantage of masterminds. And that's why in a Property Hub Plus, we've put them together.
Yeah, we've got a couple up and running now, going really well. People are very excited about those. The Plus isn't open at the moment because we're just trying to get everything worked out with the amount of Plus members we've got. But you can go to thepropertyhub.net/plus if you want to get on the waiting list for that. But yeah, that's one of the things that I'm most excited about in there. But another thing that John mentioned, I was really surprised when he started doing this. He started publishing his income reports online, and not just his income, but his expenses as well. And I was really surprised when he started doing it, partially that he was making so much money, and partially that he was putting it out there. But it made sense. Like the whole way through, he's been really open about his numbers. He's been open about how he's done things. And I think that's just great because it shows that he's got nothing to hide. He's happy to share openly everything he knows, but he's just been so open the whole way through that you can't say a bad word about him. So I think the transparency is something that we can take away from it as well. So I think people often are very closed off in property. There's often like a bit of a scarcity mentality. You think, maybe someone's going to take my deal or whatever. And, maybe sometimes that's justified. But for the most part, I think the more that you just kind of talk openly about what you're doing, what you want, what's been going on, the more people will kind of open up to you in return, and opportunities will come your way that might otherwise not have done.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the things that endears his audience to him. The fact that he is, hey guys, I'm doing this, but this is exactly how I make money. This is how everything works. There's no secrets here. Some people go, well, isn't that going to put people off knowing how much money he's making from everyone? But actually, I think it makes him even more popular, which it sounds strange, but when you read his reports, you don't begrudge him making all that money. Because he's earned it, Yeah,
that's the thing. He also talks about all the things that he's done. And it's like, yeah, you have earned that. He certainly works hard.
John is a super productive guy. He creates so much content. Not just his podcast. He's now launched another service called Podcasters Paradise. So he does so much, but he still has the same amount of time as the rest of us. So he obviously is very organized. And I think batching is a big part of that.
It definitely is. It's that kind of military discipline combined with just taking action. He was in a situation where he wanted a daily podcast to exist, but he didn't. And he thought, well, if I want this to exist, then other people must want it as well. And so he started it. He just took action. And now he's got one of the biggest podcasts out there, and he's built a massively successful business off the back of it. This is another theme that's just come up again and again, Robert. It's just taking action, even when you don't know if it's going to work. You don't know exactly what you're going to do, but you just do it anyway.
I'd put a slight spin on that, taking good quality action. He could have just launched a podcast, limped it out there and done, not much has happened. But he spent so much time before the podcast. He'd interviewed, I think he said 50-something people before his first episode went out. He networked. He built his network up. He put himself in a mastermind to learn more. So he didn't limp start. When he took action, he took serious action. He didn't do it by half. He went full force into it. And I think that's something to be admired, but a constant theme throughout what we've seen here is when people have taken action, It's not been a weak effort. They've gone for it. They've put that effort in. They've fully committed themselves, and it's paid dividends for them.
But most important thing about John Lee Dumas, he introduced us to the wonderful phrase from step one to step done during the course of that interview, and I'm going to use that every week from now on.
The only problem is I can't say it to anybody who listens to the podcast or anybody I work with. So I'm just going to start saying it with friends and family because they don't listen to the podcast. They listen to me enough outside of it. They don't need podcasts of me as well.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed that interview. I just felt so pumped up after speaking to John. Hope he had the same effect on you. If you'd like to discuss this episode, we would love to hear what you think, what you took away from it. Get over to thepropertyhub.net/fire. That's where you'll find the show notes. You'll find links to everything that John's up to. You'll find links to the books that you mentioned as well. And you'll also find a link over to the thread in the Property Hub forum where we're talking about this episode. So we would love to see you in there to discuss it more.
We certainly would. And next week, our last in this series, last but certainly not least, is Peter Shankman. Peter Shankman, his CV is uber impressive. From starting, establishing and selling Haro for millions and millions of pounds to then going on to talking around the world about his subject, which is about being nice and a particular company's being nice. And he's also wrote a book, an international bestseller called Nice Companies Finish First. He is a super nice guy, as you would expect, but lots and lots to learn from. And you can imagine so much of what he says resonates with how Rob and I like to set up our companies and how you should set your property company up. But without revealing too much, let's leave it till next week. But we're super excited to have him on the show.
Yeah, we certainly are. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Property Podcast. Make sure you join our mailing list at thepropertypodcast.com.
And remember, we love 5-star reviews. Rob even loves them more than air miles.